The early morning light filtered through the wide windows of Terminal C at Denver International Airport, casting a soft glow over the bustling Gate 27. Frank Delaney, a 78-year-old retired Marine staff sergeant, sat quietly, his hands folded, neatly in his lap. His tan jacket hung loosely over his frame, and his black slacks were pressed but worn, much like the man himself. His walking shoes, scuffed from years of use, bore the subtle limp of a war wound, a stiff left knee, a memento from Vietnam that never let him forget. Frank had been at the gate for over an hour, his posture upright, his demeanor calm, a stillness that spoke of discipline forged in fire. 3 months prior, Frank had booked this flight from Rock Springs, Wyoming, to Annapolis, Maryland, to witness a milestone, his granddaughter's graduation from the U.S. Naval Academy. She was the first in their family to follow in his footsteps, to wear the uniform he'd carried with pride. For this, he'd paid extra from his modest pension for seat 14C, an aisle seat in premium economy. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. The extra legroom eased the chronic pain in his knee, a small but critical relief for the 5-hour flight. He boarded early, thanked the gate agent with a quiet nod, and settled into his seat, his small duffel stowed beneath the seat in front of him. For a moment he exhaled, the tension in his body loosening. But the calm didn't last. 3 rows ahead, a commotion stirred. A mother with 2 young children stood in the aisle, her voice rising as she spoke to a flight attendant named Kayla, her sharp uniform and practiced smile betraying none of the tension beneath. Kayla tapped her tablet, her frown deepening, then turned and walked straight toward Frank. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone soft but unyielding. "Are you in seat 14C?" Frank looked up, his weathered face calm. "Yes, ma'am." Kayla crouched slightly, her smile fixed. "We have a family that was separated during booking, a mother with 2 young kids. Your seat, along with the 2 beside it, is the only block available where they can sit together." Frank's brow creased. "This is my assigned seat. I booked it early because of a service-connected knee injury." Kayla paused, her smile unwavering, but her eyes flickering with impatience. "I understand, sir. We really appreciate your cooperation. It's just for this flight." Frank leaned back, his hands resting on his thighs. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He'd chosen this seat deliberately, paid for it, because anything less meant hours of grinding pain. He glanced toward the mother, her toddler clinging to her leg, her older child looking anxious nearby. Then he looked at his hands, scarred, steady, the hands of a man who'd carried more than his share. "What's the alternative?" he asked quietly. Kayla tapped her tablet again. "We can offer you seat 32B. It's further back, middle row." Frank blinked. A middle seat. No legroom, no aisle to stretch into, wedged between strangers near the lavatories where turbulence hit hardest. He knew the layout well. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I can't sit back there. My leg won't make it." Kayla's smile thinned. "I understand, sir, but we need to seat this family together. If you don't move, we may not be able to depart on time." The words landed like a quiet threat. Frank glanced around. Passengers were watching now, their eyes flickering with curiosity or judgment. The cabin grew quieter, the air heavy with unspoken opinions. An old man refusing to help a family. His jaw tightened. "This is not acceptable," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I'll note that, sir," Kayla replied, already motioning the family forward. "But I need a decision." A long breath passed. Then slowly, Frank unbuckled his seatbelt. He rose, gripping the headrest for balance, his knee protesting with every movement. "Name's Frank Delaney, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine." "Corpse retired," he said, his voice controlled. "I'd like it noted that I gave up a medically necessary seat under pressure." Kayla nodded, her attention already elsewhere. As Frank gathered his duffel and limped down the aisle, the toddler looked up and smiled. Frank gave a gentle nod, no resentment in his eyes, only resignation. Seat 32B was as bad as he'd feared. Cramped, tight, the overhead light broken. the air tinged with cleaning fluid and stale coffee. He lowered himself carefully, wincing as his knee bent too far. The college kid to his right was lost in headphones. The businessman to his left was already claiming the armrest. Frank said nothing, just closed his eyes and let the pain settle in. But someone was watching. 3 rows ahead, Charlotte Hayes, a woman in her 40s with a neatly folded blazer and a laptop on her lap, had seen it all. She'd boarded just before. Frank, her sharp eyes catching the exchange, the quiet dignity in his protest, the way he'd been dismissed. She reached for her phone, not to post or complain, but to send a message to a friend in the airline's customer relations. Her text was brief. Passenger Frank Delaney, forced to give up aisle seat 14C, despite confirmed booking and medical need. Now in 32B, flight 306, crew dismissive, please escalate. She hit send, set the phone down, and stared out the window. It wasn't much, but it was something. In seat 32B, Frank sat still, his shoulders drawn in, the middle seat making him feel smaller, almost invisible. His knee throbbed, and every few minutes he shifted slightly to keep the pain from locking in. The college kid ignored him. The businessman's elbow spilled into his space. No one spoke, no one offered help. Frank wasn't angry, just tired. He'd lived long enough to know what it felt like to be inconvenient. Charlotte kept watching from the corner of her eye. She noticed his hands, thick knuckles, one finger bent from an old injury, resting still but tense, like they were holding something back. Rage, maybe, or sorrow. When the flight attendants did their final checks, they passed him without a glance, no apology, no acknowledgement. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a reply. Received. Forwarding to ops. Unacceptable. Wheel. Notify cabin if escalated. She didn't expect much, but at least the message was out there. The cabin doors closed with a thud. The safety briefing began, the pre-flight video droning on about oxygen masks and tray tables. Frank leaned back, eyes shut, the hum of the engines, blending with memories. Boots on jungle ground, a young man's voice calling for a corpsman, the moment his knee shattered under fire. He shifted, wincing, his hand brushing the armrest, only to find the businessman's elbow still there. In the cockpit, Captain David Miller, a former Air Force pilot with 23 years of service and 11,000 flight hours, adjusted his headset. His co-pilot read out pre-flight checks as ground control cleared them for takeoff. Then a red notification flashed on his console, passenger concern flagged by corporate liaison. He tapped the screen. Passenger Frank Delaney, flight TC 306. Issue. Veteran forced from medically necessary seat. Below it, a name, Charlotte Hayes, Diamond Elite PR Board Advisor. The name Delaney hit him like a jolt. He turned to his co-pilot. Hold the taxi, Captain. The co-pilot looked surprised. Hold position. I'll be back in 3. David unbuckled, adjusted his uniform, and stepped into the cabin. The shift in energy was immediate. Passengers lowered their phones, sensing something unusual. David's presence didn't demand attention. It earned it. His steps were measured, his eyes scanning until he stopped at row 32. Frank, eyes half open, froze as the captain's shadow fell over him. David Miller stood tall, his uniform immaculate, silver wings gleaming. Without hesitation, he raised his right hand in a crisp salute. The cabin fell silent. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, David said, his voice clear and steady. On behalf of Transcontinental Airlines and as a fellow serviceman, I offer my deepest apologies. You should not have been asked to move. It was an error, and we're going to make it right. Frank blinked, confusion giving way to something softer. Passengers whispered. Tray tables lowered slowly. David turned to the aisle. Is Ms. Kayla Bennett in the cabin? Kayla stepped forward, pale, her tablet clutched tightly. Yes, sir. You will escort Staff Sergeant Delaney to seat 1A, David said. If 1A is occupied, ask for a volunteer. If no one volunteers, explain that the captain is requesting that seat for a decorated combat veteran. Frank started to rise, but David raised a hand. Please, let us correct this. We owe you that much. With Kayla leading the way, Frank followed, his limp more pronounced now, every step a reminder of his sacrifice. Charlotte watched, her breath caught, as the cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. At row 1, Kayla approached the passenger in 1A, a man in a pressed polo sipping a water bottle. "I'm sorry, sir," she said hesitantly. "We need to reassign your seat." The man looked confused, then saw Frank, the stripes on his duffel, the exhaustion in his eyes. He stood without argument. "Sir," he said quietly to Frank, "it's an honor." David turned to Kayla. "If that seat hadn't been given, I'd have reassigned my co-pilot's jump seat. And if that wasn't available, I'd have given up mine." The words carried to the first 6 rows, a statement of principle. Frank settled into the spacious leather of 1A, the crew bringing him a blanket and water, their apologies genuine. But it was a voice from halfway down the aisle that broke the moment. A man in his late 30s stood, his voice shaking. "Staff Sergeant Delaney," he said, "I served under you. Camp Leatherneck 2006, you saved my life." His voice cracked. "We never got to thank you." Tears streamed down his face as he sat, overcome. David took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady. "Before we depart, I need to make an announcement. We will not take off while injustice sits in our cabin. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He fought in Quezon City, Vietnam. He didn't ask for special treatment, just the seat he booked for a service injury. We failed him. But we don't leave our own behind. Not in combat, not at 30,000 feet." The cabin broke into applause, soft at first, then swelling. Frank sat still, seen at last. The plane landed in Annapolis just after noon, the sunlight gentle. As passengers disembarked, Frank remained in 1A, calm, no longer invisible. At the jet bridge, Charlotte touched his shoulder. "You reminded us who we're supposed to be," she whispered. At baggage claim, his granddaughter, in her crisp midshipman uniform, dropped her sign, "Welcome, Grandpa Frank," and ran, to him, hugging him fiercely. "Your knee," she said, pulling back. "I've had worse." Frank smiled, and this time, it reached his eyes. Days later, a letter from Transcontinental Airlines arrived. A formal apology, a full refund, and lifetime guest of honor status. Weeks later, another letter came from the Department of the Army. A reopened file from Vietnam, 1968, documented Frank pulling 6 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle under fire, his knee already shattered. The letter was signed by General James E. Lockhart, once Corporal Timber, one of those men. "You were never invisible," he wrote. "Not to us." Charlotte's account of the flight, submitted to a regional publication, went viral. The image of Frank in 1A, head bowed, became a symbol of remembrance. Frank didn't change much. He still limped to his mailbox, drank his coffee black, but he carried himself taller. At dusk on his porch in Rock Springs, he'd smile, knowing he'd been seen. Honor doesn't fade. It waits for the right voice to call it home.